A casual meeting between allies or a plain provocation? What's behind the Taiwanese leaders' layover in the U.S.?
Tsai has been to the U.S. I think 7 times during the 7 years of her presidency. So in a way, it's a continuation of the awkward status quo. The meeting with McCarthy is somewhat unusual. He's very high level, but not from the ruling party. It is a delicate context given China's increasing bellicosity on Taiwan and the speculation that they are preparing for an invasion, with Russia's fiasco in Ukraine offering both maybe a precedent but also a cautionary tale for China.
Taiwan actually considers all of China part of itself, and it actually has its own one China policy where it considers itself part of China's mainland. China's mainland feels the same way. And I don't think that there's going to be a war, at least not one that China, the PRC, wants to start with its own island. It's doing everything in its power to peaceably reunite. Its preparation for war is to defend itself from outside interference, from actors like the United States. So the hostility really isn't coming from the PRC. The PRC is preparing to defend its own territory.
I have to say, how on earth is China preparing to defend in the context of Taiwan? They're not expecting an invasion from the island or from the archipelago. They're not expecting an invasion from the United States. I mean, clearly, I think it's meant to project an ability to invade Taiwan. I do not know if they have any intention of doing any such thing, but that appears to be what they're attempting to hint at for whatever advantage they think that gets them, no?
If other nations began putting military hardware into Hawaii, the United States would take actions to see that that military hardware was dealt with. China wants Taiwan to be peacefully reunited with the mainland. But if other countries began interfering militarily by putting boots on the ground, for example, to train troops in Taiwan, then that changes the status quo. The United States is the one that is interfering in the region and decreasing stability.
I have to say, China will not be peaceably reunited with Taiwan unless the Chinese Communist Party no longer rules China. That's just not going to happen. So this status quo will remain for the foreseeable future. Taiwan will be a major and maybe the first element of the new hot war if China so decides. And the fear in the world is that Xi, given that he's more nationalistic than recent Chinese leaders and has more power concentrated in him than most recent Chinese leaders, so you have one person who may be unpredictable, as with Putin, that maybe he might decide to do something so reckless. I personally doubt it, but that's the fear, and that's the inflection point.
China committed to peaceful unification with Taiwan. Peaceful. Okay, so I don't think that, claim that we would support peaceful unification, but if this fails, just like the Communist Party is claiming that we will take other steps, then this is not obviously acceptable.
I think the fear around the world is that not every statement made and agreement signed will be forever stuck to, basically. And that it's not inconceivable that China, being essentially a dictatorial country, will do whatever it feels it's in its own interest. I mean, remember that Putin swore he wouldn't invade Ukraine. So the trust here is simply not maximal. And maybe that's part of the problem. We probably should be looking at ways to restore trust.
Are the U.S.-China trauma offensives across the globe are a hot sign for a cold war? Dan Perry, please take the lead.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. We definitely are on the cusp of a Cold War between the democratic world and the autocratic world. And China wishes to be the leader of the latter. And I think Putin's missteps in over the past year have given China an opening to be just that. So we see it in their flirtation with Putin and their sponsorship of Iranian Saudi rapprochement, but closeness to Iran in general. We also see it in the U.S. Summit for Democracy this week and so forth. So yeah, for sure. And the question is how to prevent it from becoming a hot war. So invasion notions of Taiwan aside, I think what's needed is an outstretched hand and some optimal continuation of trade.
The U.S. passed the CHIPS Act, gave all kinds of various restrictions of the export of advanced semiconductor manufacturing technology to China. We know that Congress will consider a kind of a reverse investment act. In other words, like CFIUS vets investments in the U.S., Congress is considering a committee to vet outgoing investments to prevent more investments from China. So probably they're, living on borrowed time, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I would add that this is another case where all of this connects back to the Ukraine war. The great lesson of the war in Ukraine is that the U.S. and the West do not want to be dependent in any way that is major on a bad faith player in the world, and China has at this point been designated as such. That's why there is the embargo on advanced technology to China. That is why there will be absolute hysteria if China comes anywhere close to controlling Taiwan because of Taiwan's dominance in the global semiconductor market.
And let's roll back to the Middle East, if you will. We cannot underestimate the importance of the Saudi-Iran deal. Nonetheless, the Chinese mediation here, has China simply, shattered the assumption that the U.S. is the dominant superpower in the Middle East?
I mean, the U.S. has been inactive of late. That's true. And the Biden administration is seen as something of a weak player in the Gulf, especially. Maybe the one region of the world, other than Russia, that kind of admired Trump. And so there is an opening for China, for sure. And they were quite successful when it comes to Saudi and Iran. And that is a warning, I think, to the West, that there is a player that has ambitions on the world stage, not only in Africa, and not only in Central America, where we see they've made inroads on the Taiwan issue, getting countries to abandon their relations with the island.
One of our other guests mentioned we should be reaching out with trade, and that's precisely what I think as well. If we can tie the United States and China through trade, we can create better relationships moving forward for everyone.
Dan Perry, I do want to stay on the Ukraine question here. Is it a potential cooperation between Beijing and Washington to broker peace there together?
Well, that depends on whether either side wants it. But more than anything, it depends on Putin. I think there will be great capital that attaches to any global player that gets Putin to somehow climb down from the disaster that he has made in Ukraine. So the potential's there, but it largely depends on Putin more than China and the U.S. It's interesting that you raised the question, though, because that scrambles the equation here. I think there is something very interesting going on in terms of the dynamics governing the world order. We appear to be in something of a binary era. I myself mentioned autocracy versus democracy, but the situation with Taiwan in particular suggests something else, because the U.S. in particular, for example, is in a maximally undignified situation vis-a-vis Taiwan. They recognized one China in order to draw Beijing into the global fold as a somewhat normal player, and that succeeded, and it brought prosperity. But on the other hand, they're committed to defend Taiwan, which appears to be a completely unresolvable contradiction, and yet, despite that, has been essential, I think, for world peace and prosperity, which goes to show that not everything in life is really binary.
Mr. Pevsner, black and white world or not so much?
No. Many shades of gray. I'm not going to say 50.
Exactly.
Gentlemen, on that note, we have to end our discussion. Dan Perry, Alexander B. Pevsner, and Jason Smith, thank you so very much for your time and insights. We are taking our final 2-minute break, but when we get back, it's men versus machine. Don't go anywhere.